Transition protocols. That's what we get today in this edition of Come Follow Me. I'm Kendall Bryan Hunter, author of the book Consider My Servant Job. And this is Come Follow Me, Get to the Point, where I always show up, I always come prepared, we never take roll, and bring your own refreshments. Today it's microwave popcorn. Thank you, Orville Redenbacher. So today we are finishing up the book of Deuteronomy. In Greek, that means second law, or a reiteration of the law. In Hebrew, it's dabraim, which means words. And that is really what the book is. It's a bunch of words where it's a time of transition where they change the, going from Moses handing the reins of leadership off to Joshua. They're about ready to enter the promised land. And so it's transition protocols where we go from one age to another one. And it's also the end of the book of the fifth book of Moses. So Moses' ministry is over, and you really see why Moses was such a monumental prophet. So in my notes, I come up with I think about it was 6, 7, I can't remember. It's all Roman numerals, it's all kind of scratchy. So let's, like I said, this is get to the point, so let's get into it. I start with chapter 6, and it talks about teaching children. And if you remember with Passover is to commemorate the Exodus from Egypt, but it's also a time of teaching for children. That's part of the reason why at certain points of the Passover, it's where you talk to the children, explain what's going on to make sure that you're having a good transition problem. For example, in the Book of Mormon, there's that one generation at the end of the book of Mosiah, which were too young for King Benjamin. They didn't know the Lord. They just weren't able to pay attention to what was going on with them, and they ended up being separate from the church. And something happened where the children were just not acculturated and not assimilated into the church, but were assimilated into the world. And that's what this chapter 6 is, to make sure you're teaching children. We talked about loving God and Jesus Christ. Quotes from this. If you notice that, you kind of notice some of the things where the Old Testament gets quoted into the New Testament by Jesus Christ, and this is one of the places that you have it. So you have the two things. You have the Phylacteries and the Mezuzah. And what the Phylacteries are is, if you've seen pictures of some people who are very strict Jews, they'll have a box and a leather strap wrapped around their hand and also wrapped around their head. Not like this hat, but a different one. And that's where they had parts of the scripture to remember them. We'd understand it to be sort of a figurative expression, instead of not really putting scriptures between your foreheads and on your hand. But that's how they understood it, and it's beneficial. They seem to feel it's beneficial, so let's work for them. Also with the mezuzah, that's the one where you have some scripture and it's on your doorstep. And if you've seen the movie Ben-Hur with Charlton Heston, they have a scene where gets really angry and just smashes his mezuzah because of what's happened to his family with Roman occupation. It's sort of lost on us, but if you're Jewish, it's really meaningful, or at least if you're familiar with the cultural aspects of it. So chapters 7 and 8, and that's more of warning about, a lot of this has to do with assimilation as they're entering the promised land, that they're not intermarrying and adopting the practices of the people which are going to be in the land. And let's be honest, is that the Lord instructs them to kill people and really to annihilate them. And then people have a lot of issues with that. Okay, is this a human rights violation? How do you process that? And I'm not going to give you a quick and easy answer. It's something that's debated, and I've talked about this in previous cast about the collateral damage and why the Lord would command people to kill people. One thing to keep in mind is there's human sacrifice going on. And there's also a lot of sexual deviancy going on in the area. And you may have different views about what would a proper way to deal with it, and what's not a proper way to deal with it. And also another danger is making an anachronistic fallacy where we're living in a post-Enlightenment era where we understand human rights, and back then they just didn't have it. It was very cutthroat. It was more of a pirate type morality than they have now. So I'm not going to tell you what to believe, and if you are bothered by this, I understand it. I think that's a valid feeling to feel when you read about why God would command people to do it. And also keep in mind with some other religions where did similar things, that we're having a consistent standard. Let's go down the notes. So, like I said, this is come follow me, get to the point where I try to keep this as quickly as possible. Let's skip down as later on is that you have a reaffirmation of the law of the Sabbath, and you also have the not just the Sundays, but with the sabbatical year. So every 7 years, the slaves would be freed, and that's another issue. You have the children of Israel were slaves in Egypt. They come out there and they start practicing slavery upon other people. And I'm not going to defend it, and there's different explanations for why it was. I mean, it functioned, how it functioned was different than how it functioned in antebellum United States and in other places. And this would be a longer series of podcasts to discuss the history of slavery. For example, the English word slave, where does it come from? Well, it comes from the word Slav. For some reason, in English, the word for slave is the term that we use for people who come from Slavic nations. Okay, so how did that happen? Just stop and think about that. It's a lot more complex than people sometimes make it out to be, and you understand with at least the United States, with the American Civil War, how that was really problematic, very costly. People benefited and they liked slavery, and it's like, no, this is a human rights violation. And it got to the point where it was, okay, we're going to have to go to war with you over this human rights violation. And that's sort of a similar thing, too, is with the human sacrifices that was going on, the infant sacrifices going on in the Canaan area. Was this a justified war? In the same way that the Civil War was justified to end slavery. Keep this stuff, these are not easy answers, and people, good people, can come to different conclusions, have different feelings about that, and I understand. It's just not really an easy thing to think about. And also, like I said, make sure we're not making anachronisms here with how we judge people. Another thing later, talk about the slaves, but also with the freeing of slaves, but also with debt cancellation. That's something that we talk about is how do you get out of this debt problem? Well, how they did this, just every 7 years, all debts were canceled. And it wasn't just, okay, we'll cancel it for the poor people, but the rich have to pay. Rich and poor, everyone got treated fairly. Would that work nowadays? I don't know. That's an interesting question. I mean, God revealed it, but on the other hand, this is an Aaronic law, not a Melchizedek priesthood law. Does that make a difference? I don't know. What does the prophet say? Don't know right. Don't know right there too. But it's an interesting idea to think out there. That's the thing is, debt cancellation might work as long as it was uniform for everyone. Government, the small guy, the little guy, the single mom, the homeless vet. Everyone got their debt canceled uniformly. So. Let's go on to the Levites, and this is where we also have Levites getting set up as a special tribe overseeing the priesthood and temple operation. Because you remember that Moses and Aaron were both Levites. Moses was over the Melchizedek priesthood, and Aaron was over the Aaronic priesthood, but you have this tribes that were specifically set apart to watch over the temple. So this is what the structure is like. You have the judges, and then you had the 70 elders of Israel who were witnesses. Then you had the priests who functioned over the temples that were kind of lashed down to at this point, this is the tabernacle, not the temple. But you have the Aaronic priesthood holders who oversaw performing the temple ceremonies. And so it's not kind of like a homogenous organization like we see it right now. Another problem, another anachronism we make is sometimes we impose the United States Constitution on the Book of Mormon and on the Bible. No, they didn't have a structure like we did. It was a little bit different. It was a lot loose. It's more like chieftains and a clan set up like you had in Scotland, rather than you have an organization like we have in the United States. So it was really a very decentralized group that actually creates problems later on when they want to have a king. But I'm getting ahead of myself right now. So you have the Levites set up as a separate tribe and to oversee the priest stuff, and you have also further warnings about assimilation. This is a problem where we're not adopting behaviors of the world, but the mental attitudes of the world. Are we just buying into it? Are we just, or as members of the church, are we just replicating, assimilating what's going on there? We watch the movies, we read the books, we interact with people, and there's a tendency for us to adopt it. I mean, for example, in the case of arts, we have Latter-day Saint artists in cinema, but also in the other forms of entertainment, and are they adopting stuff of the world? For example, Game of Thrones. I started reading the first book of Game of Thrones, and I had to stop because if you've read Game of Thrones, I hit the point where about every third chapter was a sex scene. And then I see members of the church or artists who do the theme song from the TV show Game of Thrones. For me, that's a bit of a problem because I know how problematic the books Game of Thrones were, so I just stopped reading it and had to throw it in the trash. But Latter-day Saint artists doing songs about this book that's very pornographic, is that a problem? Are we assimilating in order to fit in with people? Like I said, for me, I'd have a problem with that, and I understand that different people can come to different conclusions. So I'm willing to give people some elbow room over stuff like that. Oh, chapters 29 to 30. We have a reaffirmation of the covenant, blessings and curses when you enter the land. It's the same thing. It's implicit here with the United States of America. As you read in the Book of Mormon, there's a covenant associated with the land, and you read about the covenant associated with the land in Israel. And it's basically the same thing. You have to be obedient. You get blessed. You're disobedient. You get cursings. We're coming out of COVID-19. Out of COVID-19, then we walk into a recession or inflation, and then we have this war in Russia. Okay, just put the Legos together on this one. There's also prophecies of this chapter is about the scattering and the gathering of Israel, because that's what the punishment is like, if things get out of hand, we'll scatter you and you'll become dispersed as a people. And that's eventually what happened. And with that, Moses, you hit the last chapter, and Moses gets translated. Now, it's said he was buried of the Lord, but as the Book of Mormon clarifies, Moses was translated, and he was translated primarily for two purposes. One, to keep him alive in the body, for the Mount of Transfiguration, to give the keys of the gathering of Israel to Peter, James, and John, and later to give the same keys to Joseph Smith in the Kirkland Temple. And there's maybe some other things going on with Moses that we're not aware of, but there you go. So that's it. It's really a reiteration, a summary, and a rephrasing, transitional documents. Okay, this is what happens when you get into the Promised Land. So let's hit to the Christ quotient aspect. One, what are we learning about Jesus Christ as we read the book of Deuteronomy? What type of person is he? What do we learn about Jesus Christ through the laws and the commandments? Another thing to think about is transitions. How does Christ help us deal with transitions? For example, there's a saying that you have an MTC for your mission, but your mission is your MTC for your life. But one of the general authorities over Connie talked about this as a series of leaving the Garden of Eden and going into the world. You started as a kid, then you entered the MTC. It's sort of like entering this very strange world. Then you get used to it. Then you got to your mission, and that's leaving. So your mission, you enter your very comfortable area where it becomes Eden again, and then you come home and you're entering the world again, the lone and dreary world. And how does Christ help us deal with these years of transition? I mean, in our lives, as Ecclesiastes says, there's a time to be born and a time to die. There's a time to stay put, and there's a time to move on. When we have these times where it's time for us to move on, how does Christ help us? And the last thing is commandments, covenants, and compassion. Those are all aspects of what you read about in the book of Deuteronomy. How do these commandments, covenants, and compassion bring us closer to Christ? Because this is the whole point of everything, for us to come unto Christ through all these things. Thank you, and I'd just like to bear my testimony about this, is that I have a testimony of the mission of Moses and also the mission of Christ, and that reading these, restudying the Old Testament has just been a very faith-promoting experience, even as we're on some of the trouble areas with the collateral damage. Why does all these people suffer? Why does God command people to kill people? Contrast that with the American Civil War was, in order to stop slavery, was a war justified. In order to stop human sacrifices and infant sacrifice, was a war justified in entering Canaan. So think about those things, and I hope you can come to a really good answer as you look to God in prayer, and always keep Christ at the center of everything. Thank you.